Dirshu, Sarabonam Achashuvim Shlita, all the members of Dirshu and all the participants. I would like to thank all the organizers of tonight's event. I'd like to thank the Chief Rabbi Shlita for his encouragement and support, Diane Abrams. And Achron Chaviv, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to this wonderful community for their warm welcome, for their exemplary show of achdus, of unity, kavod Torah, and the remarkable sense of commitment. And that's what I would like to talk about tonight, about commitment. But I'd like to preface my address tonight, Ein Beis Medrash B'loi Chiddush, with a Chiddush Torah that I was working on and came to me l'kavod this event and this community. This week's Parshas Vayikra. We just finished Sefer Shemais, Vayakel Pekudei, and we're starting Sefer Vayikra. And we know that in Sefer Vayikra, the first word is Vayikra with a small aleph. There's a small aleph in Vayikra. And there are different reasons given by the Meforshim. Why is there's aleph Zutra Zira, the aleph Zeira by Vayikra? It's a small aleph. I'd like to suggest perhaps the following explanation. In the end of Parshas Shemais, we know that the Mishkan was built by Betzalel. He was the builder of the Mishkan. And the pasuk says, Rei karasi b'shem Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur lamata Yehuda. Behold, I called Betzalel. Some of the Meforshim ask, Rav Moshe Zatzal asks, where do we find that there was a kriya? Where do we find that Hashem called out to Betzalel? The Torah never mentions that. And perhaps the answer is, and it lies within the words of the Ramban, that Betzalel had a thirst. He had a rotzon. He had a desire to fulfill the wishes of Hashem. And according to the Ramban, he was not particularly talented in the building of the Mishkan. In fact, he wasn't talented at all. He came as a slave from Mitzrayim. But he had an overwhelming desire to fulfill the will of Hashem. And he heard a calling. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Vayikra, the word of Hashem was spoken to Moshe Rabbeinu. That word you might have thought was a small word, a quiet sound. No, it was a kol Hashem b'koyach. It was an overwhelming, powerful sound of Hashem. And who heard that sound? Only Moshe Rabbeinu. No one else heard that sound. It came a powerful, resonating sound from on top of the Aron, from Yibein HaKruvim, and only Moshe Rabbeinu heard that sound. It's a small aleph. There's a sound, there's a calling that we all have, and we can either choose not to hear it, or we can choose to hear it. And if we have a desire to fulfill the will of Hashem, that will be an overwhelming, powerful sound that we will hear very clearly. And if not, you can barely hear it at all. And we can always find the excuse that nobody told us. We weren't informed. Certainly Betzalel could have been told that. But if you have a desire, if you really want to fulfill the words of Hashem, then there's an overwhelming commitment. And you hear the sound powerfully and clearly, unmistakably. And I want to give a yashikayach to this wonderful community that are coming out tonight, B'lei Ein Hara, en masse, that want to hear the words of Hashem, that want to hear the words of Hashem and want to fulfill it and hear the sound very clearly. and are enthusiastically coming together to embark on this program. But ultimately, to keep hearing this sound, it's not going to come from these gatherings or these presentations, but to keep hearing the sound will come from your continued desire to fulfill the words of Hashem, to want to fulfill the words of Hashem, and to hear that calling that each and every one of us have. My Rabbi say, we're holding in the Yemei Geula. We just finished Purim. We're embarking on Pesach. Purim, we know, Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, they're the days of Simcha for Klal Yisrael because we were redeemed. We had the great Nes of Purim, and we had the redemption. And Pesach, and Nisan Nigalu, Ben Nisan Asidim Ligoel. Nisan was the month of our redemption, the month that we were freed and redeemed. We are now in the Shnas HaShemitah. The Matzoi Shemitah, Matzoi Shvius ben Dovid Ba. The Mashiach comes, and the most opportune time is towards the end of the Shnas HaShemitah. What are one of the things that bring about the redemption? Chazal tell us, Kol ha'omer davar b'shem oimroi mevi geula l'olam. If someone says something in the name of his friend, he says over what he heard, that it was told to him by so-and-so, he brings redemption, a geula to the world. And what's the proof? From Esther, Vatomer Esther lamelech b'shem Mordechai. That Esther told it over in the name of Mordechai. And so we learn from there that just like there was a redemption, a geula at the time of Purim, that there will be a future redemption when one does the same. And the Tana in Avos says on the 48 Dvorim, there are 48 attributes, 48 ways that the Torah is acquired. And number 48 is ha'omer davar b'shem oimra. If one says over, relates in the name of his friend, he brings geula l'olam, he also acquires the Torah. And the question that many Meforshim ask, the Chassid Yaivitz, Esther wasn't learning Torah. At the time she was telling this over to Achashverosh, she wasn't learning Torah. How can we possibly learn that one of the Memches Dvorim Shatera Nikna Behem, that is Kol ha'omer davar b'shem oimra? What does that have to do with Esther? And in fact, we can extend the question, what does that have to do with Esther? Why, in fact, telling over something in the name of one's friend, why does that bring redemption to the world? Why does that bring a geula? Why specifically that? And why is that one of the attributes of Limud HaTorah? Saying over something in the name of one's friend, why is that an attribute of Limud HaTorah? And why is that something that we surely know? The Tana says, Halamadata, you surely know that ha'omer davar b'shem oimra mevi geula l'olam. Perhaps we can offer the following explanation. The Medrash Shmuel and the Tiferes Yisrael, they define ha'omer davar b'shem oimra mevi geula l'olam is not simply saying that the chiddush that I'm telling you over is not my own. I heard it from someone. It's more than that. It's saying I specifically heard it from so-and-so. Precisely who you heard it from. It's not yours. It's not your original thought. You heard it from someone and exactly who that person was. Because that's one of the Dvorim Shatara Nikna Behem, because Torah is emes. It's the truth. It's the ultimate absolute truth. Its entirety is truth. And to have a kinyan in Torah, one has to exhibit the midah, the attributes of emes, of truthfulness. A kinyan in Torah, when we say the Tana says the 48 kinyanim of Torah, the ways that the Torah is niknas, it just doesn't mean simply learning the Torah. It means having a kinyan, you acquire the Torah, you become bound up with the Torah, connected to the Torah, you become one with the Torah. And to have a kinyan in Torah, to be makusher with the Torah, to be bound up with the Torah, one has to demonstrate the attributes of Torah, the midah of emes. One has to demonstrate the attributes of emes, exacting, precise, even self-deprecating midah of emes. And when one conducts himself with the midah of emes, of truthfulness, when his being is emes, he can acquire the Torah and become one with the Torah, have a kesher, a kinyan with Torah. The geula, the redemption. The Maral defines the geula as when we are redeemed. When Mashiach comes, the world will be conducted the way it was meant to be. Not the world that exists today, not the way the world exists with all of the difficulties and failings and tragedies of today's world, but the way the world was meant to be, the emes abrius ha'olam. And to be zaycha, to merit, to have the geula, the redemption, that the world should be conducted al pi midas ha'emes, the way it's supposed to be, we have to be truthful. We have to conduct ourselves with the midah of emes. We have to be truthful with each other and truthful to ourselves. Honest and truthful with ourselves. Rabbi Chana Wasserman Zatzal said we're living at the time of Ikvasa de Mashiach, before Mashiach comes. And our Gedolim tell us that the time of Ikvasa de Mashiach is a time of clarification, of birur, of clarification, of separation. And what do they mean by this? What is meant that the time before Mashiach comes, our challenge will be one of birur. There will be nisyonos that will clarify, that will identify and clarify. Many of you may have read and heard about a recent trip that we had to Radin, where a group traveled together to Radin to be mispalel, to daven at the kever of the Chofetz Chaim, to daven at the kever of the Chofetz Chaim Zatzal for Klal Yisrael. And as we were departing and we left the kever of the Chofetz Chaim, on the side of the kever of the Chofetz Chaim of the Beis HaKforos, there is a fenced-off area. There's a fenced-off area with no markings, no matzevas, and that area is the Kever Achim of Radin, the area where they had the mass grave, where people from Radin were rounded up, the Jews were rounded up and shot and buried in open graves. The Kever Achim of Radin. Men, women, and children, didn't matter who and what, if they were Jews, they were rounded up and buried in the Kever Achim. And from Radin we traveled to Volozhin to daven at the kever of Rav Chaim Zatzal. From Volozhin went to Vilna to daven at the kever of the Vilna Gaon. And outside of Vilna, on the outskirts of the city, is a great, terrifying, awesome forest that sends chills up your spine. It's the forest of Punar. The forest of Punar, where approximately 100,000 Jews were shot and buried alive, buried in open graves. No matzeva, no shiva. The Kever Achim of Punar. Let's flash back to September 1945. Rav Dessler Zatzal wrote a letter to his son describing the community of Kelm. You just saw about the massacre at Kelm. And Rav Dessler writes about the glory of what once was Kelm, a simple, unassuming community, hidden tzaddikim, people who were so great and so hidden, and that itself was a source of their greatness. And it came Simchas Torah in Kelm. The people used to march down the streets of the city singing Ashreinu, Ma Tov Chalkeinu, how fortunate we are, how lucky we are that we're able to learn Torah, to be the servants of Hashem. And years later, these tzaddikim were rounded up, and again were marching through the streets of the city, were led, beaten through the streets of the city, men, women, and children, and buried and shot in the Kever Achim of Kelm. And Rav Dessler writes that many asked the question, what was the purpose of this Kiddush Hashem? Had they died al Kiddush Hashem because they were learning Torah? If it was because they were Shemer Torah mitzvahs, that was one thing. But it made no difference to the killers who and what they were. They were Jews, and that was the reason that they were killed. So what was the particular avodah? What was the message of this Kiddush Hashem? And Rav Dessler writes that the message was this avodah, this service of Hashem, the most difficult test of all. That this service of Hashem was the true test to see who would love Hashem in his heart, who would serve Hashem lovingly through all trials and tribulations. And these tzaddikim of Kelm passed the test. As they were being marched through the streets, they were singing with the same enthusiasm and the same fervor and the same mislaiva, Ashreinu ma tov chalkeinu, how fortunate we are to serve Hashem. The ultimate avodah of the Nisayan of the days prior to Mashiach. And on that merit, we have the schus to have the rejuvenation of Torah in our midst. In that schus of the holy people who are Meiser Nefesh, to be attached to Torah in the most truthful way. We have the schus of the rebuilding, the miraculous rebuilding of Torah in this community and across the world. And it's on those shoulders that we are able to come together to learn Torah and have a sivas of Torahs and miraculous rejuvenation and rebirth of Torah. Our test is not their test. Each generation has their own design. Each generation has their own test. And we have the schus of their Mesiras Nefesh. But we have our own tests. And the test, the basis, the foundation of our test is the same. Emes. To be truthful and honest. And the most basic test of honesty is, are we really fulfilling the words of Hashem? And to know if we are, we have to know what it is that Hashem demands of us. What does He want from us? What are the halachas that govern our lives? Are we truthful in keeping the halachas, in learning the halachas, and adhering to the halachas? We have our own test of truthfulness. We have the great schos of this wonderful rebirth on the shoulders of the mighty heroes of the earlier generations. But now we have to fulfill our own challenge. And we have to hear that vayikra of our own calling. And each one in our own way. Each one in our own way, to be mechazik ourselves, to learn the halachas of Hashem, to learn the halachas and the musar of Avas Yisrael, to test ourselves, do we really know? Are we really keeping it? And so, Klal Yisrael is coming together now. Klal Yisrael is coming together now to join together with a concerted effort to learn the halachas of Hashem, to adhere to the halachas of Hashem, to join together as one unified nation, coming together to say wholeheartedly, in all honesty in our heart, that we want to keep the word of Hashem, we want to learn it and follow it and join together as one nation. And this community, which so exemplifies Chashivas HaTorah, which so exemplifies reaching out to another Yid, this community which so exemplifies Achdus, the Achdus of Klal Yisrael. It is no wonder that this community is taking the lead in joining together with this program. And it is no wonder that this community is embracing it enthusiastically. And now this community that has done so much and shown so much to the world in reaching out to Yidden and to Achdus in Yidden, if I may be so bold as a guest to make a demand, a request rather, to show the world again how one reaches out, how one comes together and joins Klal Yisrael together in a unified effort to fulfill the will of Hashem. May we all be zeicha. May we merit that this demonstration of Avas HaTorah and Avas Hashem and Achdus, this desire to honestly, truthfully fulfill the words of Hashem, should usher in the coming of Mashiach and usher in the days of when the world is conducted the way it was meant to be, with the coming of the Dvar Hashem, the revelation of Hashem, the Nosi Yagon Va'anocha. It'll be a world of simcha and rejoicing in the word of Hashem.